Hi everybody and welcome to Different Leaf, a show for new and experienced cannabis consumers. I'm Britt Smith. This summer season, we're focusing on cannabis travel and tourism, just like our latest magazine issue, which is available now at nearly 2,000 outlets, including at select Whole Foods, Barnes & Noble bookstores, and Walmarts across the US and Canada. Go to differentleaf.com to order a copy of any of our issues or hit the subscribe and shop tab to find your local retailer of Different Leaf, the magazine. This episode, we're talking about how and where to find and enjoy cannabis in one of the top East Coast tourist destinations, New York City. It's already one of the most traveled to cities in the world, with millions flocking there to see the Statue of Liberty, Times Square, and Broadway, among many other attractions. But this year is special because as of early 2022, New York's lawmakers legalized recreational marijuana. The new law for adult use weed is already in effect, but that doesn't mean that any producers or retail operators are up and running just yet. Well, not fully licensed businesses anyway. As you might expect in a place like New York City, entrepreneurs started selling marijuana products without a license the day after the law passed. Licensed dispensaries aren't expected until the end of 2022. So for those of us who want to travel to the Big Apple in the interim phase between legalization and the beginning of an actual legal industry, where do we go and what do we do in NYC? Talking us through the ins and outs of cannabis in New York is today's guest, Lulu Sway. Lulu is the CEO of On the Revel, a cannabis education platform that uses online and in-person events to highlight the business opportunities in New York's new cannabis industry. We'll be back with Lulu after this quick break. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm very excited to get to know a little more about what you do. Can you tell us a bit about your background? Where are you from?
Yeah, so I have, I think I have a pretty different experience than most people around cannabis. So I'm actually a first generation immigrant from China. I was born in northern China. So my parents brought me to the States, to Eugene, Oregon, of all places, around the late 70s, early 80s. And they knew nothing about US, like American culture. So when we got there, I don't know if you've been to Oregon at
No.
all, but it's a little hippie hamlet. Portlandia is a thing.
I've heard of that, yeah.
So when we landed, there was a really lovely community that took us in, helped us acclimate, taught us English, babysat me, and they were all cannabis growers and crystal healers and energy healers, and a lot of people coming back from the ashrams in India, so yogis. So it was really interesting to be part of that world, and I ran away from that world because I was like, I'm tired of these Birkenstocks. I want to like wear heels, and I ran screaming from that world. But 20, 30 years later now, it's like the prodigal daughter has returned and it's full circle back into how I was raised, and I have such a deep appreciation for that now.
Wow, that's such an amazing way to grow up. What sort of community did you take with you from there? Did you bring any of that knowledge and love of cannabis out with you into the rest of the world?
100%. So these are my aunties and uncles that raised me. When I was interested in cannabis, I was 13. It was actually my aunt who went and procured for me. She gave me 8 bong hits, and she just it was a lot, but she really wanted me to feel it. Because the first couple times you do it, sometimes you're like, I don't feel anything. I don't feel anything. She was like, if this is your first time, you're gonna feel it. And then she just watched me. She just made sure I was okay. I was in a safe space, and that was her idea of making sure that I had clean product and that I had a safe space to experience it.
Those sorts of foundations are now really built into what you do at the moment.
100%. I feel like I've become that Sherpa for
Yeah.
people that are interested in trying new things. Same thing with psychedelics. My uncle procured for me when I was interested when I was 15, and he watched and sat for me for my first, mushroom trip. So that's just been, I had a really beautiful experience. I had elders involved in experimenting. Like I said, I've become that person for many friends and family and even colleagues. And it was just a beautiful experience being able to have a little bit of intention and safety around experimenting with new dimensions, new experiences.
That is so different from how most teenagers are taught
Yeah,
to relate themselves to drugs or substances.
I'm glad we're returning back to it.
Mm.
But it was also nice being Chinese, having a history where plant medicine and herbs have been used for millennium. So that was
Wow.
one of the things that my parents, I think, connected with the hippies that raised me, was that they're like, oh, these people do, herbs like we do. These people do Tai Chi with us on the weekend. And that was a family thing. Like 4 generations of my family would go and do Tai Chi every Saturday, and we'd have friends join. So it was a very community driven childhood that I had. And I think that's kind of part of the key of all the stuff that's happening right now, and the
Mm.
importance of being able to educate your community, normalize it within your community, and see it from a different perspective than the propaganda that we've been fed for like what the past 60, 70, 80
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
So now you're in New York City and running On the Revel. From in-person cannabis events to educational online events to block parties. Tell me how this company came to be.
So, my partner Jacoby and I founded On the Revel in 2016 in New York City. We were really kind of bored with the conferences that were out. Jacoby has a really great term. He's like, it's just male, pale, and stale. So, which is pretty accurate.
Yeah.
And then back then in New York at that time in 2016, there was a lot of groups for networking around advocacy, networking around investment, but there really wasn't a group that was bringing in ground truth knowledge of what's actually happening in the cannabis space. There's a lot of snake oil salesmen just talking about being experts, and
Mm.
there was a lot of headlines about this is the green rush, and there's $1 billion, all the stuff. While at the same time, I came up from the legal Washington market on the manufacturing processing, post processing side. Jacoby came from Colorado with one of the first vertically integrated operators called Mindful. So we were seeing what was actually happening on the
Mm.
ground, and it was really different than what was being reported. We're both nerds. Jacoby's a math nerd. I'm a design nerd. So we decided to host our first event. Back then it was called the Cannabis Tech Group because we're both in tech. And that kind of morphed. What we really wanted to do was first and foremost bring real information about legal opportunities in cannabis,
Mm.
because there just wasn't a lot of talk around that. Secondly, we really wanted to bring people that we respected who shared the same ethos as us. We started bringing in speakers from existing markets that we either worked with or really vibed with, or one of our friends worked with. So all of our speakers have always been either first degree or second degree from us. And we
Mm.
wanted to just make sure that New Yorkers had real information, that before they, put up their kids' education fund or took out a second mortgage on their house, before they did that, they really understood what was going on in cannabis and how and if they wanted to enter in whatever aspect they wanted to do in this new industry.
So you've seen it really grow from 2016 up until now. So like literally the entire time that it's been legalized in the state. Before it was legalized recreationally. It was only rec in 2021, right?
Yeah, so I was in Washington State. Friends of mine from college, when it went recreational in Washington State, invited me to come out and see if there was anything that I wanted to do in cannabis. So I was basically an intern for about a year in a town called Belfair, and went on these installs with the machines, the extraction and distillation machines. So I really got to see also what was happening in different markets in different states,
Yeah.
from the original like small building out your extraction facility in a garage, to these like tens of millions of dollars, like really really fancy build outs that were happening on the East Coast.
Yeah, well, you've really seen it grow. So I've also seen it the same way. I was in California and started going sort of reporting on it in about 2015 out there, and it's changed so much. On the
Yeah,
West Coast and the East Coast looks so different. The way people do business, the products that we buy, it's all very different based on the coasts. I feel like there's sort of different interests and different reasons that people smoke weed even. What is it like now in New York? Because now there's recreational weed that's legal, but there's no sales yet. How have things been changing over the last year? What have you seen?
I think there's literally a gray area dispensary, unregulated dispensary, however we want to call it these days, whatever label we're using, that's popped up everywhere.
Hmm.
So, New York is in this transition mode. I would say it's kind of like I guess it was kind of like how it was in California in the early 2011, 2012. People were just going for it. New Yorkers have this mentality, which is just do it and apologize later.
Uh-huh.
So, my bodega down the street, my neighbor was like, "Oh, weed's legal. I just bought an ounce on my iWatch." I'm like,
What?
"Where?" He's like, "At the bodega." I'm like, "Our bodega?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's legal." I'm like, "No, it's not legal." But, so there's like the bodega. I don't know if people know what a bodega is. It's literally like a convenience store.
Yeah.
There's one on every block. So all the bodegas are, selling weed. Some of them even have little rooms in the back where they're having like their display. Um,
What?
there's ice cream trucks that are running around selling weed. I just actually saw some packaging where it literally was an ice cream with weed on the inside. So it's the wild wild west right now,
So they're really finding this loophole because like there's a law now that you can possess up to, is it 3 ounces, something like that?
That's a good
I
question.
think it's, well, there's a the law now in New York is that, recreational cannabis is legal. You can have a certain amount on you and nobody's going to
I mean, three
arrest you.
ounces is not a small amount.
It's not a
Like
small amount.
it's not a small amount.
No.
You
So
can
people are just sort of like, I'll gift you this bag of weed if you buy this thing from me,
Yeah,
and that's like a loophole.
there's the gifting program, right? Like buy this t-shirt, buy this NFT, buy this piece of art, buy this sticker, and for $60 and you get an eighth with that. So,
Yeah.
it's New York. That's what I love about New York. It's, entrepreneurial driven, but we'll see how long it lasts. And, I actually talked to my friend who's in the NYPD, and he's like, we're not here. It's such a transition period. We haven't been told to enforce anything because there's
Yeah.
no laws to enforce right now.
It's such a weird time. Like you kind of are allowed to have and give and grow weed, but you can't buy it or smoke it anywhere.
You can
Like,
smoke anywhere. It's the same rules as cigarettes. So you can
okay.
smoke outside. You can't be within 20 feet of a building. Supposedly, if you don't, it's the same thing with California, right? If you don't own the building or something like that, it's illegal to smoke anyway
Right.
inside. But I don't.
It's such a weird rollout of things. We had a similar thing out here in Massachusetts where it's been legal recreationally since 2017, but there's still no consumption spaces and you
Yeah,
can't smoke outside. And so there's been these like private clubs where you can become a member and you can bring your own cannabis and smoke in their building. If they own the building, they'll allow you in to smoke in it. But there's no cafes, there's no bars that allow you to come in and buy their products and consume on site. Is anything like that in the process in New York?
yes, we have a consumption lounge license actually. So one of the nine licenses for New York allows for consumption space, which we're
Nice.
pretty stoked about. I mean, we've always had unregulated consumption spaces,
Yeah.
but it's going to be interesting to see what becomes of these consumption lounges. And New York does hospitality and entertainment really well, so
Mm.
I'm actually really excited to see the innovation that comes out with that in New York City.
Oh, yeah. I think it's going to be a very cool place to travel to. What do you think about cannabis tourism? Do you think that's going to start popping up there?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think a lot of people, a lot of the conversations and how they're estimating the revenue for New York is based on tourism.
Mm.
So yes, I think there's going to be a large number of tourists that come here. But I think, New York already has so many entertainment things that it's just going to be a nice supplement to do all the existing things like going to the theater or going to sports events, things like that. Of course, Times Square, all of the tourist spots, I think it'll be a novelty at first.
Yeah.
If you talk to any New Yorker, our buying habits are very different than in most cities.
How's that?
Most cities, you have a car, you drive, you go and get things. New
Mm.
York is completely delivery based.
Hmm.
Your groceries are delivered, your wine is delivered, your food is delivered, everything is delivered. Someone comes and picks up and drops off my dog. It's like it's a very much, you don't go out and do things, and you also usually stay within probably like a 4 or 5 block radius. So the idea of me going to Times Square or any of these big tourist destinations, like, stab me in the eye, please.
Yeah.
The worst thing, that's not going to happen. I'd
Yeah.
probably do that if a friend from another market in cannabis wanted to kind of see that. That's when I would do it. But it's pretty much local, and it's pretty much, everybody's got a guy.
Yeah, so as always, for city natives, those kinds of places won't be what locals are looking for necessarily. But I think that's good news for those of us who do want to travel to New York City and be really touristy and also try some cannabis products. The places that we're already going to visit, like Times Square, will likely have cannabis stores opening up in the next few years. And I saw in a recent news story that weed smoking is allowed, like you said, anywhere smoking cigarettes is allowed, including at 6 designated smoking areas at the New York State Fair this year in Syracuse. This is actually going to be the second year in a row. And that's going to run from the last week of August into the first week of September. So yeah, go, get high and get on a Ferris wheel or whatever. So I'm interested in where the cannabis will be grown. If I come to New York City to try it versus if I went to travel to upstate New York, I like craft cannabis. You said earlier that New York's hemp farmers are now putting THC seeds in the ground. So are those farms going to be supplying the whole state as rec cannabis stores open up? Can they grow enough? And will the weed that's being sold in the city be grown closer to the city and therefore more likely to come from like big indoor grows rather than the craft cannabis?
I think it's going to be supplying the entire state. The quantities, I don't think, we'll see what happens. You have these, craft hemp farmers competing against, like, was it Columbia Care that just bought 175,000 square foot facility?
Wow.
So, but I think that the name of the game right now is to just try to make sure that our industry here is equitable, and small and medium sized business are allowed to compete and flourish alongside all of the corporate cannabis folks as well.
Yeah, here's hoping. I like a little bit of passion in my bud.
It's different. I mean, you can taste the difference. You can feel the difference. It's
Yeah.
it's completely different.
Have you tried a lot of different states near you? Have you tried weed in Maine or Vermont?
Actually, I have not.
So whenever I travel somewhere to another state, I want to try something local, something that's different from where I come from, and it's got sort of a different experience. Maybe the culture there is a little bit different. Like,
Mhm.
I'll go and visit some friends in Denver, and I want to try something that will make me really euphoric and awake because I want to be outside hiking, and it's
Right, right.
different to if I'm here in Massachusetts. I want something that's going to be a really heavy indica and puts me to sleep in the cold. Like,
Yeah, well, that is a thing for
yeah.
sure.
So what do you like to smoke in New York? Because here in Boston and in a lot of the Northeast, there's a lot of high potency flower. There's a lot of fast acting edibles. What are you into at the moment?
Where I'm at, I'm in my 40s. I've got stuff to do. I don't want to, like, be completely locked, couch locked. Like, the weed now, for honestly, is just too strong for me to smoke. It's
I
just
agree.
way too strong. And now you add the nano emulsion stuff with all of the edibles. I'm like, everything is so strong. Like, can we go back and make some like 1980s weed? That would be great. Can we make
Yeah.
a Farrah Fawcett weed? You know,
Is there anything that you saw on the West Coast that you might want to see some more of in New York as the recreational product developers start to create and consider the needs of both tourists and locals?
I really like the fact that Washington was making, like, things that you could adjust to your preference.
Yeah.
So I think that's cool. Everybody is a little bit different. Everybody's body chemistry is different, and when you're starting out exploring, you give someone who's never done smoked, consumed anything, you give them, a gummy or two, and there's eating, like maybe it's five. It's like, whoa, that's not going to be a really nice experience. But if you give them sugar to add to their tea, or add to whatever they're baking, like they can experiment with it. And that's part of learning what works for you.
Yeah, that's a nice part of going to somewhere different as well. You can try the flavors of that region. Up here in the Northeast, I found this really good infused olive oil. And
Mm.
it's like locally made, and you can get infused honey. And the honey from your local area, it's different to any other honey. So like if you can get it infused and local, I've got infused ice cream up here in
Oh,
Massachusetts.
yeah.
It's just like, yeah, different things are starting to come out in different markets. And that's really what I look for when I want to travel somewhere and try something new. So let's talk a bit about what you're expecting to see in New York in the future. I really want to see how different the social side of it is. Like you said, it's like a different culture in New York versus Boston versus Texas. But like we're all very different cultures. And I want to see what it's like to get high in Times Square.
When
I'm one
you
of those tourists.
Yeah, no, when you let me know when you come down. I'm happy to bring you around and introduce you to like our community. And I mean,
Very
New
cool.
York has everything, right? There's like a really strong hip hop urban culture with weed. I mean, everyone consumes. I think the difference with New York versus the West Coast, right? The West Coast cannabis culture has been open on the West Coast for a very long time. The East Coast is more conservative. I think the East Coast has been more traditionally a drinking culture. So I know people smoked weed, but they were always very quiet about it.
Mm.
And now, like, I think people feel more comfortable talking and exposing themselves, coming out of the closet. I've had friends who are executives in fintech companies that are daily smokers.
Mm.
So when you think about culture in New York, I think there's just so many different types of groups that consume. I've got mommy friend groups that consume together. There's, nerd developers. I'm in the tech space that love to smoke and code. So, I mean, I just think there's so many people that I always consumed, but now, they're slowly feeling comfortable talking about it on the East Coast. I can take you to so many different types of events. We've got a beautiful culinary scene here. So chefs that are doing infused dinners. There's speakeasies that we could go to. Some of them feel like, more elegant. Some of them feel like frat houses. So there's really cute places like High Garden, which is a restaurant, but it has kind of like creatives that go there. There's Legacy, which is a really beautiful art gallery.
Mm.
So there's tons of places when you come down. And let's go for a tour.
Oh, absolutely. I would love that. That'd be so much fun. I'm a big fan of New York. It was actually the first place that I went in America when I was 17 years old. I came over to New York to do 2 weeks working on Broadway, sort of interning
Nice,
and learning the background of sort of how plays get put together. It was
nice.
so interesting. And coming from London, I was like, this feels like home almost. It's a really
Yeah,
similar, like, there's a similar vibe of people. So I feel like when I moved back to the East Coast, I was like, these are my folks. These are the people
yeah.
I want to live around.
I think New York and London have very similar things, right? Like
Yeah.
the arts, the financial. You guys are the financial capital over in
Hmm.
Europe. We are here in the Americas. The people are, fashion's very important. Food, well, food now, food maybe a decade
Yeah.
ago in London was not that great. So I think, yeah, the vibration of both cities is very similar, and the people that are attracted to those cities, like I think are kind of type A personalities that just want to explore and build.
Yeah, yeah. I'm excited to see how New York goes. I'm going to be keeping up with it over the next few years. Hopefully, we'll see some more rec businesses open up. What do you have in your future? What can we keep up with you?
On the Revel, we are doing quarterly events still. So we host kind of TED Talk style folks around different topics in cannabis. We're doing a block party this year. So the
Cool.
whole vibe that we've always tried to do is, keep our event in New York reflective of the diverse, like amazing things that we have in New York. So it's education, real talk, like we don't blow smoke anyone's ass about what it means to be in cannabis. We always have food and music, and our whole vibe has always been like, we want to like generate this feeling like you're at a Brooklyn Day party. So and now we're going to do a Brooklyn Day party. So we're going to be doing an event at the end of the summer, end of August, beginning of September in Brooklyn. We're going to host our second all-day conference in November called Revelry. If anybody is interested in joining our community, we have a community called Dope People. We have a Discord channel. We share a lot of information and resources there. We have a directory of vetted service providers and consultants that we've worked with that we want to share with our community. We just did a boot camp. So on Monday, we hosted our first boot camp for retail operators. So folks that are coming from legacy that are interested in applying for a retail license. Yeah, so those are kind of the things that we're doing. We just really want to make sure that everyone has access.
Nice. I love it. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, Lulu.
Thank you so much, Britt.
A huge thanks to today's guest, Lulu Sway from On the Revel. Next week, we'll be chatting to legendary talk show host, veteran and cannabis advocate, Montel Williams.
I do a show right now that's called Military Makeover, and a lot of the veterans that we help are still suffering. These guys are suffering from PTSD, and I'm not a doctor, so I can't step in the middle of them and say, look, I'm telling you, I really think that you should, just see how cannabis could help you, because I for fear that I don't want them to get in trouble, and some of the states that we do the makeovers in are not legal states yet for cannabis.
Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast wherever you're listening right now. Follow us on social media at Different Leaf and at different_leaf, and I'm on social media at Brit the British. Check out differentleaf.com, where you can purchase all the issues of Different Leaf the magazine, including the new summer issue all about cannabis travel and tourism. That's differentleaf.com.